unfortunately, we've developed these survivor genes that are going to get us through when there's a famine, but there's never a famine. So it means that if you've got the genes to survive, you've also got the genes for weight gain.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking about nutrition with Professor Clare Collins. Professor Collins is a professor in nutrition and dietetics in the School of Health Sciences at the University of Newcastle. Professor Collins has made major contributions to our knowledge on the impact of improving diet quality and food patterns on health and wellbeing outcomes. Hello Clare, and welcome to Wellbeing.
It's great to be here and thanks for inviting me.
What is nutrition?
Nutrition is a broad science, really. So it covers not just the food you eat and what it does inside your body, but also how it affects your overall well-being. In addition, to health, people often think of things like heart disease or diabetes, but food also affects your mood.
What makes a food nutritious?
Well, in Australia, we have a guide called the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. If you remember back to school days and you're a little bit older, you're probably thinking about a pyramid. Well, the pyramid disappeared in 1993 and it got replaced with a model called the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, and it looks like a plate. In terms of the plate, the way that relates to you is about that plate should be full of nutritious, healthy food. And the foods you find on the plate are the basic core foods. So vegetables, fruits, whole grains, dairy products, and lean meats or vegetarian alternatives. So that's things like good old baked beans, which are a legume, and nuts and seeds. And what's off the plate is what we call in nutrition world discretionary choices, but basically it's the junk foods. And I don't think I need to give you a long list of those, do I? Because I think we all pretty much know what they are. But it also does include alcohol. And then things like fats and oils, there's something that we should aim for the healthier version of those. And the healthier version tends to be things like olive oil and polyunsaturated oils, while the less healthy options are the ones that, even though you might like them, things like butter.
So how well are we eating in Australia?
Well, if we were back at school, I'm afraid we would not get a very good report card when it comes to our national nutrition. For example, less than 1 in 10 Australians eat enough vegetables. And it's really surprising in a country where we grow lots of fresh fruit and vegetables. When you look at that plate model, it's supposed to be filled up of all those nutritious, nutrient-dense core foods. Well, about 1/3 of our plate is full of junk foods. For younger adults, so for, school kids and teenagers and young adults, it's almost 40%. So we're not doing very well at all. The way we measure the effect of that is when you look at our national health and disease statistics, and that's called the burden of disease. So when you look at that, poor diet, even though it comes in at number 3 in this list, it contributes to 4 of the top 5 risk factors for burden of disease. So smoking's still number 1, and then overweight and obesity number 2, then poor diet, then high blood pressure, and then alcohol use. But the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare just recently added up the cost of those diet risks, and they found out that diet has now displaced smoking in terms of how much healthcare resources, how many times we have to go to the doctor, how many times we get admitted to hospital, how many medications we've got to take. It's poor diet that's now number 1. And I find that really, really sad. It seems to be something that we've lost in knowing intuitively how to shop, cook and purchase foods. And part of the reason for that is because, way back in the 1950s, like maybe some of the listeners can remember what supermarkets looked like then, but the average supermarket only had about 500 foods, and shopping trolleys were the size of the little baskets you get when you go in the supermarket. And, and it was mostly the mums who went to the supermarket during the day because they weren't open at night, and they had to ask the grocer, I want a pound of flour or a pound of sugar. But the average supermarket now has got anywhere from 20 to 40,000 products, depending on the size. And that explosion from 500 to, 30,000, 40,000, it is not in those basic core foods. So can you think of some aisles at the supermarket that you walk down and you go, wow, I wonder what that's made out of, because it's all packets and you can't recognise anything that grows, in those ingredients. So unfortunately, we have not made progress. We've gone backwards in our national nutrition.
Why is it important that we have good nutrition?
Oh, for so many reasons. Like, I think generally people think about heart disease or diabetes, but good nutrition, you feel the effects way before you get one of those chronic diseases. And one of the biggest things is that sense of well-being. So have you ever been on like a health kick yourself and, at the start of the new year, you go, right, that's it, all junk food out the door and I'm only eating vegetables, and made a big effort to eat healthier. And what most people say is, I'm actually feeling better. I feel like I got a bit more zip or a bit more oomph. And that's because all of those nutrients, they're not even vitamins or minerals, they're called phytonutrients. Some of them haven't even been named, that are in those plant foods or in the basic food groups. They act as helpers inside your body, and they help the pathways that regulate how glucose, which is like petrol in a car, how it gets to your brain and your heart and your lungs. And they also regulate how your muscles work and how your muscles are able to burn up the fuel, which is the glucose in your blood. So it's kind of like the little tweaks or the spark plugs. So when you eat healthy, first of all, you feel better. And then you don't have other problems like, you don't have constipation, you don't have high blood pressure. Once you're not eating healthy, first of all, you're not feeling that great. Yeah, your bowels might stop working properly, and then you will slowly develop high blood pressure, and then you find out you got high cholesterol, and then you find out you're on the track to diabetes, and all of those things take a long, long time. So I think using food to focus on how it makes you feel good. The other really important thing is that when you prepare those basic foods, because most of the basic foods you just buy them plain at the shops, and then you've got to take them home and do something with them. Well, when you prepare them, you're more likely to sit around a table and eat with whoever, whether it's your flatmates or your family or friends. And there's something about that celebration or sharing of food with other people that can bring positive feelings and make you feel better as well. So that's what I mean. It's more than, the vitamins, the minerals, the fibres. It's also about the social aspect of eating.
So would you say that there's a direct connection between diet and mental health then?
Oh, there absolutely is. So we've looked at the research on this, and there's a lot of studies on the association between things like depression and anxiety, but it seems to be stronger for depression rather than anxiety. And now, with that recognition from observational studies, which don't prove cause and effect, because if you're not feeling that great, you're less likely, to shop and cook. But there's now starting to be some interventions for depression showing really promising results, that eating healthy foods does actually have help in helping people manage things like mild depression. So I think this is really good news. It wasn't effective in anxiety, and the key thing is that people always need to stay in touch with their local doctor in regard, and their psychologist for managing that. But I think it's exciting that this unrecognised potential of healthy eating is really beneficial. So if someone in your family suffers from a mental health problem, then something nice you can do for them is cook them a nice meal or show them how to prepare some healthy foods, and know that that's something positive you can do, because often as a relative you feel like you're useless or you're hopeless and you can't really help your family members. But feeding them good food is something you can do.
How focused would you say the food industry is on getting good nutrition out there?
Well, I've been around for a while, so I'm a bit cynical. And I think the food industry will tell us they have our best interests at heart. But, you've got to be practical. They're also, making a profit. And, so while it's a balance between not wasting food, and a lot of food gets wasted, they describe it as being wasted at the farm gate, because we in the shops only want the perfect apples or the perfect zucchini. So a lot of that gets wasted. And there is a lot of effort to recover those foods and turn them into sellable food products. So part of that is then to turn it into processed or ultra-processed foods. So while there are some positive things around food industry, and obviously we didn't have the food industry, we'd all be on our own trying to, milk the cows and grow the veggies and plant the wheat and bake the bread. So obviously we've got to work together, and there have been some positive changes in, they call it reformulation. So that's when you decide, well, let's see if we can reduce the sugar or reduce the salt and still have a decent product. But I think we need stronger regulation around limiting the worst of these, what are called ultra-processed foods. And if you're not sure what an ultra-processed food is, just go down one of those aisles, where it's all boxes and packets and you're not even sure what the products are, and pick one up. And if it's got, 4 or 5 words or numbers that you've never heard of, well, it's not an apple, definitely. And it's likely ultra-processed. And to kind of like hook us in, there often will be that picture of the apple or the cow eating grass or the lovely babbling brook to try and trick us into think it's healthier than what it really is. But, for each of us shopping each week, try to buy those basic foods that even your grandparents would be able to identify. And that's one practical step on helping us all eat healthier and get the nourishment as well as the enjoyment as well as the feel-good factor out of eating healthy.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast, where we're talking with Professor Clare Collins from the University of Newcastle about nutrition. If you like this content, check out the other episodes we have on the list. How can the way that a food is processed affect its nutritional value?
Let's take, for example, the good old potato. So if you dig the potato out of the ground and wash the dirt off, well, it's got a reasonable amount of fibre and it's got a reasonable amount of nutrients. And it's not particularly high in calories. But if I slice that into the thinnest wispy bits I can and deep fry that in oil and add a whole lot of salt and maybe some nice flavours, then it's hardly a potato anymore. More of its weight is actually fat and salt rather than the potato that it started out of. So we've taken something that is basically, gets a hard time and is fairly nutritious if you were eating, good old mashed potato or boiled potatoes, and turned it into something that we can't stop eating that's high in salt, generally high in poor quality fats, super energy dense, and got a big profit margin on it.
How affordable is it to eat well?
Yeah, now this is a really good question, and we've actually created a website specifically to address this. The website's called No Money, No Time. Just put it into Google or get one of your grandkids to put it into Google and show it to you. And while we really initially targeted people in that age group 18 to 35, everybody's using it. And we've got a whole lot of recipes as well as hints to show people how you can prepare fast food or food fast cheaply at home, cheaper than what you can buy fast food in the shops. So we know that, the average family household spends around $90 a head, so around $270 a week. But most of that money is actually spent, something like $100 is actually spent on the ultra-processed takeaway food and junk foods. Only about $15 a week is spent on vegetables and about $10 a week on fruit. People will say, oh no, that pumpkin is so expensive or cauliflower is so expensive, but we don't want to spend our money on those things. So that's why we've created the website to address some myths. And on the website, one of the pages that's actually clicked on the very most is to address that. We showed people how you can eat for $55 a week, but get all of your vitamins, minerals, fibre. And if you go to No Money, No Time into the hacks and myths, you'll see it comes up as number one. I think what the barrier and the challenges are for people is time and taste. So if you really do want to save money, then you have to plan ahead, because if you just get to work and go, oh, what's for lunch? It's not likely that you're going to be able to have a salad sandwich for, $4. If you go out and buy that, it's going to cost you probably $15, and then by the time you get a coffee and a drink, you've spent $20. But to have the inexpensive, tastier, yummier sandwich, you have to actually think about it the night before and make it the night before so it's already in the fridge and you can, rush off to the bus in the morning. So go to No Money, No Time. The other thing that we've done to help people out is a lot of people told us is that they don't have a MasterChef kitchen, which is hardly surprising, or they only want to use their microwave, or this time of the year starting to use the slow cooker, or they've only got one pot. So you can click on the icons and the recipes will be limited to the utensils you have or you want to use. And as I said, then we've got lots and lots of recipes where it's less than $5 a serve. Now, You can't even go to a fast food outlet and get a $5 meal.
Is it possible that there could ever be an economic divide to getting food?
Oh, there definitely is. So if you live in the rural and especially remote areas, we know food is a lot more expensive. So for people with the lowest incomes, eating really healthy is still actually unaffordable. And so that is what there are people trying to work with the communities and government and even organisations like Food Bank to ensure that healthy food gets to the stores in a fresh state at affordable prices. So for people who are living where there are bigger supermarkets that are part of the big chain supermarkets, if it's a time like right now with the floods and the petrol prices where you go, oh, wow, look, some of the vegetables are double the price. Have a think about what your budget is for the vegetables. So you normally spend $15 a week. So, aim to spend $10 then on the fresh ones and then go to the canned and the frozen section because this is where the real bargains are. In that last expenditure survey of what we spend, I think I told you we spend about $15 on vegetables. We only spend $1 a week on canned vegetables. Now, you can get cans of tomatoes for about 80 cents. You can get cans of all the legumes, so your baked beans, red kidney beans, all of those things. They're classified as a vegetable, and actually they double dip. They classify as a whole grain as well. And most of those, including the low-salt varieties, are around $1 a can. And things like, whether you're buying the red kidney beans or one of the newer ones, black beans, which are really, really tasty and great in Mexican food and in bologneses. You can also save a bit of money by buying a bit less meat and replacing it with some of the beans. Another cheap canned item is lentils. And when they're cooked in with mince, you don't even know they're there. So if you're making Mexican, you've got can of tomatoes, can of lentils, can of kidney beans, half the quantity or a third of the quantity of mince you normally use, and nobody even notices. So you've just saved yourself a lot of money, boosted heaps of nutrition in there, and you've saved money on maybe buying some of the fresh vegetables that you normally do. Also go into the frozen section. There's often things on special as well, and taking advantages of those. Now, if you are able to go in-store and you're not making all your purchases online, the other thing to have a look at is because the supermarkets can't sell past a use-by date, if there's 1 or 2 days to go, there's often a few bargains to be had because they've always marked them down. Or it may turn out that you actually have a grower market, or you might be living near somewhere where there's a fresh produce store where you can get some bargains as well.
Does climate change pose a threat to the availability of good foods?
What's happening in terms of farmers being impacted by, flood, drought, and then the mice plague, this is going to push our prices up. But even though it feels like food is expensive, we are still in a better position than many other countries because our country does have that ability to feed itself. One other thing I'll just go back to, Jack, about the no money, no time. Like you asked me, well, how do people know if they're eating healthy or not? Well, you can look at those core foods. But on that No Money, No Time website, there's also a free quiz called the Healthy Eating Quiz. It's what's called a dietary screener. So it can give you some immediate feedback on whether those food groups that you're eating as healthy as other people, your age group in Australia, or whether you might need some more work. And if you get one of those suggestions to needs more work, it generates a personalised report with some suggestions linked to the recipes on No Money, No Time.
If someone is obese, does it mean that they have poor nutrition?
One of the key things we've recognised for people who are living with obesity is that it's a complex chronic condition. So once upon a time, it was an advantage if when you ate food, you were able to digest and store that, and you were able to store body fat when there was lots of food around. But we never ever have the famines. So if you think back to when we were hunters and gatherers, you were only eating if you could find something or catch something. And in those periods of floods or droughts, you might go a number of days with very limited food supply. So unfortunately, we've developed these survivor genes that are going to get us through when there's a famine, but there's never a famine really in Australia. So that means now on this background of almost an oversupply of food and big serves, we know that serves are double to triple what they used to be back in our grandparents' or great-grandparents' day in the 1950s. So it means that if you've got the genes to survive, you've also got the genes for weight gain, and you're very susceptible to gaining weight. And the environment constantly tells you, eat more, here's a bigger serve, you deserve it. And so, it's really a struggle for people and a chronic condition. And more needs to be done to ensure that people get access to the treatments that can help them. And that does not always happen, especially in regional areas where there may not be as many services as available as people living in the cities. But always talk to your GP about it, who can do a health check so that if you do have excess body weight, they can check your cholesterol, check your blood sugars for pre-diabetes or diabetes, and check your blood pressure.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast, where we're talking with Professor Clare Collins from the University of Newcastle about nutrition. If you like this content, check out the other episodes we have on the list. Is there a link between poor nutrition and cancer?
Yeah, there definitely is. Some specific cancers, many people aren't aware that alcohol, for example, is directly related to over a dozen cancers, particularly breast cancer. And sadly, even though everybody might like to have a drink, there is no safe amount in terms of cancer risk for alcohol.
Can poor nutrition cause infertility in males and females?
Well, it can be one part of the factor again. When you carry extra weight, people tend to think of, weight and body fat as like a spare tire, but it's actually not inert. And what I mean by that is that fat tissue, that's referred to as adiposity, adipose tissue. Adipose tissue also produces some hormones. So it can produce estrogen, which is the female hormone. And if you have excess estrogen, that can increase your risk for some estrogen-sensitive cancers and can also interfere with the reproductive hormones. So while it can be one part of it, it's not the whole story. So anyone experiencing infertility needs to, again, see their GP, because one of the interesting things is that just small amounts of weight loss can give a jolt to fertility. So some of the centres would recommend an initial period of trying to eat healthy and live a healthier lifestyle than you've probably ever perhaps thought about before. And to do that, you're likely to need expert support. And if you need support for weight management, I'd ask your GP to refer you to an accredited practicing dietitian, APD for short.
Australians love meat. Is meat nutritious?
Lean meat is nutritious. But the problem is very high intakes. It's another food group that's associated with an increased cancer risk, particularly bowel cancer. Now, in the last version of the Australian Dietary Guidelines, we looked at the evidence for meat and cancers, and it seemed that the risk only increased once you got to that 450 500 grams, which is only half a kilogram. So if you translate into what's the lower risk or the amount of meat where there's no increased risk for bowel cancer, it's having a serve of meat about the palm of your hand, maybe just slightly bigger, 3 times a week. So that's tiny. So you can go to a restaurant and get a 300, 400 gram steak as standard, and can even be on special. So keeping your meat intake lower and, using meat as part of the dish, like in a stir fry where you might chop it in pieces so that when you put it out, you're not looking for the big slab of meat. Putting in less mince and adding in the canned beans like we talked about before, that's a way of lowering your meat. And then mixing it up with things like chicken and fish. But the other type of meat, processed meat and smoked meats, again, the risk for bowel cancer goes up from zero intake. So every extra, slice of salami or Devon or ham is actually increasing your risk of bowel cancer. And that's one that most people don't know about. And, when we did those reviews of that research evidence, more than 10 years ago now, I personally stopped buying processed meat, mainly because in my family we have a hereditary risk for bowel cancer. So I think some of these relationships, if those conditions are in your family, you may want to be even more strict than somebody who doesn't have those conditions in their family.
When it comes to nutrition, where does water sit?
Well, your body is about 70% water. So it's got a pretty good mechanism for trying to regulate your fluid balance. So long as you don't have a heart condition, so if you're older and have a heart condition, it's likely you may be given some specific advice because of medications you're on. But for everybody who doesn't have heart conditions or kidney conditions, then drinking that somewhere between 1.5 to 2 litres of water a day, and your kidneys will filter out the excess. And how do you know if you're drinking enough? Because when it's hot, you sweat more and you need more water. You just have a look at the colour of your wee. Your wee should be the colour of straw, so a pale yellow colour. So if it's a pale yellow colour, then basically you're drinking enough. If it gets really dark, then, and it's a bit hot, well, then you're not drinking enough fluids. And if it looks like water, well, you've probably gone a bit too far in terms of how much fluid you're drinking. But that's an easy one to kind of self-monitor because you just got to check the colour of your urine.
After all we've talked about, Claire, what would be your advice to people in how they can improve their diets?
Okay, so really, right at the start, we talked about the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating and that plate model. So I would say aim for sticking to those core basics as much as you can and avoiding those foods with all the numbers, the highly processed foods. The other thing we've learnt from the Healthy Eating quiz is that people who get the highest scores, they actually have bigger variety of vegetables and fruits. So that makes sense when you think about it because they're also getting more of those phytonutrients. So aim each week you do your shopping, have a look at the veggies and fruit and see which one you actually like but you haven't bought it for a couple of weeks and put that in your trolley. And if you do that every week, that will boost your variety. And then I would say plan before you go to the supermarket, plan some meals you want to cook and then cook at home and eat at the dinner table with the television turned off. And that's the best way to improve your nutrition, improve your well-being, save money, and in the long term, improve your health.
Well, thank you for being on the show today, Claire.
My absolute pleasure.
My guest today was Professor Clare Collins from the University of Newcastle. If you liked this episode, check out the Wellbeing podcast for more, and tune in next week where we begin a series on PTSD. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.